Now, when I started this podcast, I never really imagined the amount of people that I would meet in the community, the amount of relationships that I would build and connections I would have, and some of the really unique and great people that I've been able to meet over the last year and a half of doing this podcast. And our next guest is one of those where it kind of just reminds me of how powerful and great this podcast really has been for myself and for this community as well. So our next guest is Mike Twitty, who is our Pinellas County Property Appraiser. And I'm super excited to meet Mike and kind of learn more about his story, share that with you guys. He's got a really great story, and he is a local. He grew up here in Pinellas County. He's super passionate about Pinellas County and has a ton of experience, with properties and values and appraising, and just has a great approach to what he does. So let's jump right into it. And I know you're going to enjoy meeting Mike Twitty. Welcome to another episode of Palm Harbor Local. I'm your host, Florida native and real estate ninja, Donnie Hathaway. I started this podcast because I'm extremely passionate about connecting you with the people and the local businesses that make Palm Harbor so special. Palm Harbor, Florida is a great place to live, work, and play. It has everything you could dream of, from the food, the outdoors, the lifestyle, to the people in the community. I wanted to create a podcast that connected the community and inspired everyone to live better. To join this community and stay up to date on all things Palm Harbor, visit my website, it's palmharborlocal.com, and sign up there to join the locals. And remember, together, we keep Palm Harbor local. Welcome, Mike. I appreciate you jumping on the podcast today. I'm super excited to chat with you and just kind of learn more about your story, kind of how you got into your position and your role and stuff. So thanks for being here.
Great to be here, Donnie.
So you grew up in Pinellas County, correct?
Yes, I'm one of those rare natives, but
yeah.
we're starting not to be as native. More and more kids are being born here. So
yeah, I'm one of those too. So I grew up here in Pinellas County as well, a little bit after you did, but. I'm curious, what was it like growing up here in Pinellas County when you did?
Well, I grew up in I was a kid during the 70s and 80s, basically, around here. So born in St. Pete, we moved to the mid-county area. Actually, my dad was in print sales and then got into real estate. And we were living in a spec home in the first phase of Bardmore. So, and at that time, they had some of the golf courses built. But lots of vacant lots, lots of trees to climb and build forts in, and lots of tarpon to catch in the bayou, and
crazy
redfish and snook to chase, and all that kind of stuff. So, still had some of the great outdoors as a kid to run around in.
Yep. Do you miss any of that? Has it with all the development and stuff, especially since you've been a kid?
Yeah, I mean that was a big part of my life, and then we would escape to Crystal River, Homestead area, and had friends up there with ranches, and
cool.
So we spent time up there, whether it was hunting, fishing, scuba diving, all those types of things. But Pinellas still at least had more green than it has now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still very blessed with our park system, our beaches,
right.
For being the densest county in the entire state. We still have some pretty nice recreation. Mm-hmm. But you don't have the same kind of element for our kids to run around in. Mm-hmm. And some of that's societal change too. We just, people don't let their kids roam like they used to.
Right, that's true.
I don't know if you were the same, but I just had to be home, by dark or for dinner, and
My
they didn't know where we were.
Whistling, yeah. Time to come home.
Right.
Yeah, I grew up, so I grew up in Pinellas Park and then Oldsmar and stuff. So we were the kind of same to you, in Bardmore and Eastlake Oaks in Oldsmar. We were the first ones to move into that development, right? So we were, as kids, running around in there in the construction sites. And I don't know if that was an old golf course or what, but we'd always find tons of golf balls and stuff in the back. So yeah, it is cool to, it's cool to see the change, right? The change is good and progress and that sort of stuff. But it would be cool to kind of go back, way back when, and there was a lot of green.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we need to try and preserve as much,
Mm-hmm.
true green space and recreation type space that we can. And we've got to be, with being the densest in the state, we've got to be really cognizant about smart growth and smart development. We don't want to shut everything down and have no growth.
Right.
That doesn't really help anybody either. Then you start to turn into a dying county, and then you're wondering how to fund all the services and fix roads and all those types of things. So you don't want to get in that type of a situation. But we do need to be very careful about how we tax our infrastructure going forward.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point there, right? It's kind of like a fine balance of like progressing, but not progressing too much, right? And keeping some of the character that makes, Pinellas County makes this area attractable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did you, let's, I guess, kind of talk more into like your career and stuff. How did you get into like becoming an appraiser? Because you were an appraiser for a long time before you stepped into the role that you're in now.
Sure. When I came out, I went to the University of Florida. I was a real estate major, and they still had the undergrad degree there now, which they no longer do.
Okay.
They just have a master's. Well, I came out, I really wanted to get into development or anything in real estate other than appraisal. And it turned out we had just come through the S&L crisis. The RTC was starting to take over assets and dispose of assets, and so nobody was hiring. I mean, when I came out of college, the job market was nothing like it is right now.
Yeah.
It was really bad, and appraisers were some of the only ones actually hiring. And I thought, you know what, I'll go ahead and give it a shot. And here I am over 30 years later. So that was obviously in the private sector, and I'm in the governmental side and as an elected official. So very different, but that ride was very good for me. I learned so much in the appraisal field. You actually get to see and touch and understand so many things because you're dealing with so many different people. And I was predominantly commercial. So, and even, I did a lot of big residential stuff, but anything, 5 units plus was commercial. So we did lots of large condo developments, the stuff you see up and down the beaches, and downtowns, all the bigger mid and high rise type stuff, mixed use projects. I did a lot of marinas. I was a landfill expert. I worked on a lot of things. So I would travel depending on what the property type was. If I was doing a landfill, I might do it anywhere in the Southeast. If it was a marina, I might do it anywhere in Florida. And if it was a condo project, I was probably working along the west coast of Florida. Okay. But it exposed you to a lot. You get to interact with developers. You're looking at lots of pro formas and construction budgets, and then you're obviously analyzing real estate data and doing all the sellout analyses, and so a lot of cash flow analysis type work, and obviously you're learning about construction at the same time. So it was just great exposure, and really set me up well for what I do now. And obviously my firm, I had two other partners, but we were managing a crew of about 20 appraisers, and that was full service, residential and commercial. We were based out of St. Pete, but like I said, residentially, we were basically doing Pinellas and Hillsborough, maybe a little bit of Pasco, but commercially, you're roaming based on your specialties.
Yeah, so. You're more statewide at that point.
You can be, yeah.
So is that kind of like where you kind of tied into like you get like a little bit of fix from being like wanting to be the developer, right? But instead now you're appraising some of these properties and stuff and still learning, all the back end stuff. Right.
And even my mentor in appraisal always told me, he goes, whatever you do going forward, this will serve you well. Yeah. Because you're building your toolkit, and seeing, you get a lot more insight into how people are doing these projects, how they're working, than if you just went out and started working for one developer. You just don't get the same exposure. Yeah.
Do you still ever want to be get into that side of the business?
I don't know. I don't know if I have the stomach for it. I mean, it is obviously it's a high risk, high reward kind of game. So I think I'm by nature that's the other thing. The only problem with being an appraiser, it does make you kind of skeptical. You become the great skeptic of a lot of things because you've heard almost everything, and then something new rolls around. It doesn't quite seem like it's going to pass the smell test.
Right.
So you move a little more cautiously, and sometimes you miss opportunity as a result.
Yep. I can see that. So let's dive into like the appraiser role and that job, right? Because that's a difficult job, especially in like the residential sector, which I know more of than like the commercial side of it. But what are some challenges there? Because, you know, I feel like the appraisers, it's either like, you know, you're cheered and you're praised, or you're applauded, not appraised, but or you're, you know, the buyers and sellers are not happy with you because you didn't appraise the property. Right.
And just for right now, I'm just for the listeners, I'm going to clarify, you know, an appraiser in the fee sector or the private sector, we call them fee appraisers.
Okay.
You know, they're working, you know, they're hired to do a job as an independent fee appraiser. Usually it's a lender in most cases, but it could be for litigation or, you know, FDOT or, you know, who knows, a lot of options there. Versus what I do now, which is running a team of, you know, roughly 50 appraisers, but we're setting assessed values for tax purposes. So very, very different duties there. So we'll go back because I think you're leaning towards the fee side
correct,
now. So,
but I'm curious about the other side as well. So
right. So in the fee sector, yes, the residential role of the residential real estate appraiser, they can be the hero or the one that's frowned upon for squirreling a deal. But at the same time, you know, a lot of times they're there as a protective layer, and sometimes somebody might not appreciate what they did at the time if it messes up a deal, but sometimes it's protecting the buyer. You know, they're kind of the value police and the reality check on what can be a crazy market sometimes.
Yeah.
And so, you know, obviously you know the old phrase, it's, you know, part science, part art. And that truly is what it is. Because sometimes you have better data than others, and you have to rely on appraiser judgment and what they've seen, you know, through past experience when it comes to valuation issues. So, you know, most deals end up going, we've been in an unusual market these past 2 years where so many deals are going above ask, you know, an astronomical number of them. We just have never really experienced that. And when I do presentations, I show a chart that actually you can get out of MLS if you manipulate the stats right to extract it. But it's a 10-year chart that shows supply of active listings. And it shows a decade ago we were at almost 10,000 actives, and now we're down below 2,000. And then I put demand on there and show the sales, which is demand. And the demand hasn't really changed that dramatically over that entire 10 to 11 year run. Yet now it's basically more than where supply is. So that, as you could see, that active listing count come down, and especially, you know, post pandemic, once the pandemic started and it started to kick in, you could really see the squeeze. And obviously that's what created that pop above asking prices. And then the great wealth migration, you know, these people coming in right now, you know, last year, our top in-migration states were New York, Illinois, and California. But California traditionally wouldn't even be in our top 10, you know, before the pandemic. And now this year to date, I checked the numbers yesterday, year to date, California's number one.
As far as migrating to Florida, which is
to Pinellas County.
To Pinellas County.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy. There's a lot to kind of unpack there. It is interesting, you know, the demand, like the amount of homes and the amount of homes sold, that really hasn't changed. I think that number across the nation is probably pretty steady, you know, year over year. It's just like the supply changes, you know, from year to year, from decade to decade, and what it is, right? Yeah, it's interesting. So let's talk about let's dive into some of the, you know, so the values have gone up drastically, you know, 30-40% in some markets. So that affects taxes and the taxable value of the property and that sort of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about that and how
Sure.
you guys are kind of managing that.
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge. We haven't seen value jumps like that since before I was in my current role, so I didn't have to deal with it. I was in the private side during the last run up before the Great Recession.
Yeah.
So I saw it happening from that end, and then I really had a very strong feeling for the 3 years leading up to the peak that we were very overheated and that we were going to collapse. And this time still feels different.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the underlying factors are not the same. The ability, if you could fog a mirror, you could get a mortgage back then, or actually get maybe 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
And just led, and we had a lot more inventory then too. And you had kind of an inventory surge, people backing out of contracts on new builds and all that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
As well as the Wall Street derivatives and all the things that kind of bubbled out after the fact that we didn't know was going on behind the scenes. This time, it feels a lot more people have skin in the game, but obviously we can still go through a correction, and I think we're already starting to see a slowdown in the actual number of transactions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can be affirmed from the loan origination side, as well as actual sales that you guys are probably seeing, so that should start to help from anybody that's a new home buyer that's still trying to kick the door down and actually be a winning bidder on something.
Buy their first home.
Yes. Hopefully, that active listing gap will start to widen between where demand is a little bit and give us a little breathing room. I think our next realtor market reports that come through are going to show us likely to break a month's worth of supply for the first time in many months.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yes, because it was 0.9 last month, and the new reports will come out in a week or so. Yeah, and we'll see. But I suspect it's going to break the 1 month.
Yeah,
because we're starting to hear about more people are saying, "Oh, we might miss the window. We'll go ahead and list now." So
yeah, do you think that's been the trigger? Is that the feeling of like being towards the top of the market, and now the sellers are kind of like worried about missing it, or is there something else there?
I mean, that certainly is a driver, but at the same time, you know how difficult it is to prep to even sell a home. You got to, because the biggest thing holding people back is where they're going to go. Yeah. I analyzed some numbers in our county, and I was actually surprised to see it was as high as this, but our Pinellas to Pinellas moves. So one homesteader moving to another Pinellas homestead was actually 54%, which was a bigger number than I thought. And then we showed out-of-state buyers coming into Pinellas at 25%, and then those from elsewhere around the state coming into Pinellas at 21%. Okay. Those numbers aren't perfect, but that's the best we can do with kind of the homestead data we collect and things like that. Yeah. But getting back to I know I went far afield a little bit, the taxable value situation. Yeah. So, taxable value jumped up basically double of what it was last year. So we've been on a 10-year run of positive taxable values in Pinellas County and around much of the state. Our average in Pinellas has been 7.3% for the last decade. Okay. And we just hit 12 for this year, which is the highest in the 10-year run. And market value change, we have at 20% overall for the county. Wow. But you got to remember, in our office, which is different than Fee World, they're worried about pretty much usually one number, which is the as-is market value in most cases. Yeah. Well, in the assessor's world or the property appraiser's world, we're dealing with 3 values. So you've got just market value, which is our equivalent to market value. Okay. But does typically have a deduction for cost of sales compared to true market. Okay. Then you have assessed value, which the difference there is those two are the same when you have a new buyer and you've crossed the first January 1, assessed value resets to just market. But over time, you can develop a gap there. That's what the benefit of Homestead and the benefit of the Save Our Homes cap
Yep.
does. So you have that gap that can build over time that saves people quite a bit in tax dollars. And then obviously they can take their exemptions away, and
Yep.
then that gets them all the way down to taxable value.
Mm-hmm.
So that number of 12% I'm talking about is really just that bottom value, the taxable value. That 20% is that top value number that we've seen.
So that's a more realistic number as far as like the values of the properties going up versus the taxable value, which is minus all of the homestead exemptions.
Correct. It has exemptions and assessment caps that are holding it back.
Okay.
Because your homesteaders can't go up more than 3%.
Yeah.
Or CPI, whichever is less. This year, with inflation at 7% last year, obviously we hit 3% cap.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say inflation. CPI hit 7%, and CPI is Consumer Price Index.
Okay.
That hit 7%. So obviously we hit the 3% cap. We're likely going to hit it again for 2023, unless we start having some negative CPI, which I don't anticipate.
Yeah, right.
With where the numbers are right now. So, that will kind of dictate where our homesteaders go. So if taxing authorities don't roll their millage rates back or don't change their millage rates at all, if they just hold serve, then their tax bill would go up by 3%. Somebody that's not homesteaded, they're limited by a 10% cap, but they're not limited on schools. So schools are exempt from that cap.
That 10% cap.
Correct. Yeah. So the millage line item, they pay full boat on.
Okay.
They pay based on just market value.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're capped at 3% for the homestead exemption, right? So the investors, right? That's what I was going to say. Like the investors, the influx of investors and corporations that have purchased, like in Pinellas County, right? They're going to be paying that highest taxable valuable.
Correct, because if they're a new buyer, the year you purchase doesn't matter whether you're a homesteader or a non-homesteader. The year you purchase, you get the benefit of the seller's exemptions and caps through the rest of that year,
right? Unless
that seller strips that exemption, and that happens sometimes. They'll call our office and actually strip the homestead.
Oh, so you can do that?
You can up until a certain point. We do it a little different than some, but we try to protect the new buyer as much as we can.
Right.
But you do have cases where you'll have somebody selling a home, and I'll give you a couple of scenarios because this is pretty important from if you're in the sales game at all to understand this, because you really need to know your seller's intent. So if a seller already owns another property that they intend to have as their homestead, and whether it's in this county or another county, anywhere in Florida, they could do it. So good for you to know if their intent is there, because then you can actually market the property the correct way. That actually, it shows that there's homestead on there, but their intent is to take that off. So we need to make sure we do the tax proration based on no homestead being on and the cap reset, because you're going to reset, in that year as opposed to in the next year. So things like that are important to know. What we do in our office is, you have the March 1 homestead filing deadline. Yeah. That's for a timely file. What we do is if a seller strips the homestead before March 1, really nothing we can do about it, because that's the timely file. They could pull it off.
Okay.
If they cross March 1, now it's a late file. So we can make judgment on that, and they have to do an extenuating circumstance form. They submit it. If it's in our county, we can deny it if we can see that they were kind of trying to play both sides of the fence.
Yeah. Okay.
And they're now trying to pull the wool out or the rug out and move the homestead over to this other Pinellas property that they already owned prior to January 1. Okay. That we can deny. If they're in a different county where they have this home and they're pulling that, we likely won't be able to deny, because the property appraiser in that county may have already approved that homestead, and we can't allow two.
Okay. So the reason that the seller would strip it is strictly just to move it to another property.
Right.
Yeah. And what if they're buying another property? Does it strip if they're buying the next home and then they're reapplying for the homestead, right? When they buy that new home, they're reapplying for the homestead exemption on the new home, and then the old home, it's not stripped from the previous home that they owned at that point. What's up, Palm Harbor? It's your host, Donnie Hathaway. If you are looking to stay up to date with all things Palm Harbor, then visit my website. It's palmharborlocal.com. Super simple. You can sign up there, join the locals, where I'll be sharing more information on local events, local history, and what's happening in Palm Harbor. You know, I really want to create and add more value to you as a listener for spending your valuable time tuning into my podcast. So join me there, keep listening, and remember, together, we keep Palm Harbor local.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
They can put it on whichever one they declare as their primary residence.
Okay.
So you could own, 3 houses, however.
But if they're selling, I guess my question is, if they're selling the one property and that's their homestead, right? So they only own one home, and then they move in county, they move to that next property, and it's going to be, again, their primary residence. Does it strip the homestead exemption from the home they sold at that point?
Not automatically. So
Okay.
It does when, if they just left it, when that new buyer crosses the next January 1.
Right. Okay.
The new buyer hits their first January 1. That's when it comes off.
Yep. Okay. That makes sense. And then, so what's great about all this information too, like if people have questions about it, it's all on your website, right?
Absolutely.
And you guys have recently updated your website, and it's way better than what it was before. Even though the website before that was a great website, for our Tri-County area, is definitely my favorite to be on. And now it's even better and more. I feel like it has more data. It's easier to access information. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
What you guys have done
Love
there.
to. Yeah. So a lot of people still don't even know the new site is there, and we need to do a better job of funneling people to the new site. Part of it is we're limited on what we can even do in the old site, in that old frames environment. That site served us well for over 20 years. It was one of the first to come online in the state, and has been a great tool. But I'm passionate about the technology stuff, and I knew we could build a better, a better mousetrap, so to speak. And so we've taken the best tools out of the old website, like the tax estimator that we built when I first came in 2017.
Yeah.
That's transitioned over. But we built new tools in there, like a comp sales tool that gives you a comp set really quick with some great default parameters you don't even have to think about, and then you can fine tune them if you want.
Yeah.
The mapping is vastly improved. There's measuring tools for, if you want to measure square footage of a lot or acres, or you want to measure a roof and get some linear measurements, any of those types of things, you can do that on the new site. New aerials. You've got the bird's eye, type aerials where you can look at all 4 sides of a property now.
Cool.
Are on there. You have the Google Street View, in addition to our normal aerials, and you can also do historical imagery.
Cool.
The flood map is easier to flip on and off, and you can now you have zoning links, so you can drill as far down as a jurisdiction will let us go for zoning information. So if it's a larger jurisdiction like City of St. Pete or unincorporated Pinellas or City of Clearwater, we'll drill you all the way down to the parcel level into their own GIS site, their own mapping. If it's a small beach town, as far as we can go is maybe a PDF, a little color version of the PDF in the small beach town. So, but we take you as far as we can get to.
Sure.
And we'll keep modifying that. And the permit links are much better. We keep refining that process.
Yeah.
And trying to make that better. But we're still working out a couple of rough edges on the searching logic. Some people are having trouble getting to certain types of property in the search on an address. So we're trying to fix that stuff and make that work more like the old site did.
Okay.
But there are other things in the search that are so much more flexible now that you can find things in a much different and more powerful way. The advanced search, you can do some very complex data downloads.
Yeah. I guess what was the reasoning behind like updating the website? Is it just because like the technology was outdated and stuff, and you just wanted to provide more value, or?
Yeah, it was like I said, it's on an old frames architecture, which really limited what we could do with the site going forward. It was never going to be mobile friendly in that architecture.
Okay. Yeah.
So that was a big reason we wanted to make the site responsive.
Yeah.
So now it works on any mobile device. It resizes automatically. Wanted to make that, have lots of speed buttons to do common tasks quickly.
Yep.
We added a My Location feature, so it's great for mobile. If you walk onto a property,
perfect.
you touch the My Location button and it pulls the parcel data for where you're standing.
Yeah.
So just, I just tried to be forward thinking on what I would want if I was in the private sector.
Yeah.
As a user. And we did it, we talked with lots of industry users about things they would, like to haves. And we tried to bake that stuff in there. And
how long did it take you guys to build all this out?
it's been about a 3-year process.
Crazy.
Yeah. We're using an outside vendor that had never built a property appraiser site before.
Nice.
So it was, but by doing that too, we got it extremely cost effective.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously we have a lot of brain power from our staff side and my side into it, but we knew we were going to do that anyway to get what we really wanted. So that's why I didn't go with somebody that had built property appraiser sites before, because they would want us to use the framework of what they already had.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it to be like anybody else. I wanted it to be our own vision.
Mm-hmm.
So they were good with the UI piece, the user interface, and helping give us, well, you can do this kind of tool or you can do that kind of tool. So we used their experience there, but then we used our experience to really build out what we thought the best, true professional user and homeowner experience would be.
Yep. And the website, so you can just go into the old website. You can have access to it there. When is that going to be? When are you going to switch over to that? Or?
Right. Yeah. So right now, our current site's at pcpao.org.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go to the top of that page on the homepage, you'll see a banner that'll say, click through here to go to our new site. There's a link there and a big image that you can go through. So that right now will take you over to pcpao.com. So right now we're running .com and .org in parallel.
Okay.
So they're both alive and running. We're trying to get more people into .com, start to drive it and get feedback on that. And then we're ultimately going to land at .gov. So 2 days ago, we got approval for pcpao.gov.
Okay.
So we're going to stand up .gov. .com will become .gov, and then we'll start a countdown clock on .org.
Okay. And that'll go away.
Yeah.
Right?
And then everything will redirect. If you have old links to .org, ultimately you're just going to land at .gov.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Right. So another thing I wanted to ask you about too was the portability, like the homestead portability, that 3-year rule. Can you kind of dive into that and explain that a little bit for the people? Sure.
So when that passed in 2008, I don't know if you were in the business before
I was not,
2008.
No.
So it was an interesting time because we had a market cycle where a lot of people were coming in, again, from outside of our market area.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of cash buyers were buying up, particularly a lot of waterfront property and pricing a lot of our seniors out of their homes.
Okay.
And that's when everything just moved at market. There were no caps.
Okay.
So people were concerned about, oh my God, if we have new comps getting set because of cash sales and all of a sudden sales are jumping 10, 20% a year, then that means people's tax bills could potentially be jumping that much, and that could drive, residents out of their homes.
Yeah.
So a property appraiser actually out of Lee County brought forward a constitutional amendment to the legislature that became Save Our Homes. Now, Save Our Homes, I should say, Save Our Homes goes all the way back into the mid-90s.
Okay.
So that was put in the 90s. So we did have the benefit of Save Our Homes up until, but 2008 was critical because that's when Portability passed. So you had all these people now that had benefited from Save Our Homes, but now they didn't want to leave their house because there was no way to keep that savings if they went to another property in the state. They would have lost any benefits. So now you had this, so there was a pent-up demand of people that wanted to move, but they didn't want to lose their savings, so they stayed put.
There's savings on like the taxable
Correct.
income, right? Yeah.
Correct. So
Interesting.
So in 2008, Portability was passed, and then that kind of broke the dam and allowed property owners to start moving around again, and they could port their Save Our Homes benefit from one homestead to the next. Problem is, they build it as you had 2 years to transfer that benefit from one property to the next. Well, you know how those constitutional amendments read. They're not the most clear thing.
Yeah.
And people obviously are going to interpret, well, 2 years means 2 years from when I sell my property. But that's not the way it works.
Right.
Because the tax year always starts on January 1, and it's technically 2 tax years. So the only time you would get 2 years is if you sold it basically at the very beginning of January.
January 1, yeah.
Right. So you sold at the end of the year, you've burned your first tax year, and now you have a year left.
Yeah.
So like a year and a day. Yeah. So I picked up on that before I got in office, and I saw the problems associated with it.
Yeah.
And then I saw the pending storm of values starting to rise, and I saw people's benefits building up, and I saw the potential of people losing very sizable benefits when they move from one property to the next, because they might have a financial situation that makes them have to sell that home, but they can't replace that homestead by making another acquisition for an extra year or so, and they end up missing their window, and they lose all that benefit that they had built up.
Yeah. So this gives them that extra year to pass on that benefit, like to that next home.
Correct. So yes, I actually championed that and brought that to the legislature and got our association to support it. And it took us 3 years to get that through, to get that change from 2 to 3 years. It was on the 2020 ballot and passed at 75%. And so now that gives everybody 3 tax years. It's still based on tax years. There's no way to change that piece.
Right.
But my thought in going forward and the way I sold it to the legislature was, this was sold to the public that it was 2 years. However, it's really not. So let's give them the real a worst case scenario of 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
So by adding the additional year, even in a worst case scenario, you get 2 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then so now they have that flexibility where they can, right, if they can't purchase that next property. So in a market like today, right, maybe you're not quite ready to buy that next home, but
Correct.
you want to capitalize on the equity that you have.
Exactly. It's a great example right now in this time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So last thing I wanted to ask you about was the ballot coming up. You have amendment number 1, which has to do with a flood insurance, correct?
Well,
flood, flood
Yeah, flood insurance and obviously rising premiums and issues with the National Flood Insurance Program and FEMA were kind of drivers that motivated me to think about a creative solution to try and help, not only Pinellas property owners, but also those around the state of Florida. And we thought this could even potentially turn into be a great model for the rest of the nation. So what it does is it would allow people the ability to, and this is only within their special flood hazard areas, because there's been a push for years telling those in the A and the V flood zones to elevate or mitigate, elevate, do these things, try and get away from playing with the 50% rule game in those special hazard areas, and my thought was, all right, how do we give people an incentive to elevate their homes voluntarily rather than having to wait until a calamity event happens and then they're getting grants, they're getting assistance dollars, all things that, you and I end up paying for down the road.
Right.
And I said, let's encourage them to invest private capital to get out of harm's way before an event happens. There was already language in statute that allows people to replace that home after a calamity event up to 110% of their original square footage without resetting their cap or without treating them as new construction. And I said, why can't let's leverage that, but let's be proactive instead of reactive. So we've kind of just taken that and turned it into a proactive scenario. So now those within the A and the V zones would qualify as long as they can, you've probably seen some of these homes where they're hydraulically lifting and even a slab on grade home now and bringing them up in the air and getting them above. So you got to get your lowest living above base flood elevation.
Yeah.
And then you use the 110% calculation on that area that's elevated above base flood.
Okay.
We don't count the garage area against them underneath that they would use, as long as it's, you can't build it out. It could be storage,
garage.
And
space,
yes. Thought that's going to add a lot more value to the structure. It's going to get them out of harm's way. If you have a storm event, now it doesn't wipe them off the tax roll, so it doesn't hurt the tax base. It actually helps the tax base down the road, because even though they're getting a benefit while they hold that property, once they sell it, cap's going to reset, and it's just going to be like any other property out there.
Right.
But we thought, we've got a lot of 1,500 square foot, 50s and 60s vintage properties, and some people think, well, it's just for the people on the water. Well, it's not. 70% of the homes in the special flood hazard areas are valued at around, a year ago they were valued at had a median value of about
20% to this
of about 250.
Yeah.
And they're not on the water.
Yeah. I think I think most people think like, oh, flood zone, that it's either on the Gulf or the Bay side, but there's little pockets and stuff in like the East Lake area, Palm Harbor, in Clearwater. I had one recently where I learned that it was in a flood zone. I'm like, holy, I had no idea, but yeah, that's why the flood map is important, and having that on the website makes it like much more user friendly.
Yeah. I will tell people, you really, if you're going to do anything with your home, because it's very complicated in Pinellas County right now because of our floodplain management rules. If you're in an unincorporated county, obviously you have different floodplain management rules than if you're in the city. And so you really need to talk to the building departments within the various jurisdictions to understand what you can do if you're going to make improvements and you're going to be involved with the 50% rule. They've all got different rules, different lengths of time before you can pull another permit, how you're going to phase your construction, all those things. It's very different for each one. So I encourage people to, you can't one-stop shop at our website for on that, but we just put the FEMA map up, and you can see that, but that is not necessarily the gospel. The county restriction is more stringent. If you're in unincorporated, you're going to have to add a couple more feet to that minimum base flood elevation.
Okay.
So just encourage people to do their homework on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. Well, this has been fun. I want to ask you, outside of work and kind of what you do, especially like growing up in the county, kind of two questions, like what do you do for fun? And then the second part of that is like, what's like one of your favorite spots to go to?
Okay.
It could be like a park, or it could be a place to eat or something.
Sure. Well, my family and I, we've always been boaters. So we love, boating, fishing, scuba diving, all that type of stuff, and love getting out on the water around here. And then the other thing that is one of my passions that I've done pretty much all my life is play music. Cool. So I play in a couple of bands periodically. So I usually gig around town, once or twice a month. So watch for us. You may see your friendly property appraiser around town singing somewhere. So I lead sing with a band called Code Red that plays around the county, and then I also perform with one of my sons in a acoustic and drum duo, mostly acoustic folk rock, and that band's called Folk University. Okay. So we're always doing different things. We're doing charitable events. We do just a variety of gigs around the area. So that's very rewarding to play with your kids like that, and just gives, it's a great outlet and a great way to exercise the other half of your brain.
Yeah, I was going to say, you have like the analytical side, the appraiser side, and then the creative side, the musician and that sort of stuff. It's interesting.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, Mike, I appreciate your time today. It's been fun chatting with you, getting to know you a little bit, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Donnie. Appreciate you having me.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of Palm Harbor Local. I really hope you got a ton of value out of today's episode. Now, if you're looking to connect with the guest or just get more information on the episode, then you can check the description below. I'll have all the links in the episode as well as a link back to my website. It's palmharborlocal.com, where you can stay up to date on what's going on with the podcast and sign up there to join the locals. Let's get after it this week, and remember, together, we keep Palm Harbor local.